This is the Asia Trade. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney.
I'm Avril Huang in Singapore. Your top stories this hour. Asian stocks set to extend record highs after tech leads gains on Wall Street. Geopolitical risks around the U.S. capture of Venezuela's president sparking gains for treasuries, oil and gold. Nicolas Maduro and his wife pleading not guilty to drug violence and weapons charges, setting off a major legal battle over the Trump administration's intervention. Also ahead, South Korea's president hits the reset button on relations with China. Lee Jae-myung meeting with Xi Jinping for the second time in 2 months.
And I'm Annabelle Drewlers at CES in Las Vegas, where top tech names are set for a hard sell on AI. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang opening the show by hyping new Rubin data center products that are nearing release.
And those comments from the Nvidia chief may be adding to the enthusiasm surrounding AI in the Asian session again today, which, of course, yesterday we saw the region's benchmark, MSCI Asia Pacific, hitting those record highs supported by all-time highs on South Korea, Taiwan gauges. Although the shift may be towards the focus on fundamentals in terms of earnings into the next couple of weeks, we are seeing that really tech rally supporting Asian equities overall. So a bit of a turnaround for what we saw in the later part of 2025. Now, in terms of what we're seeing in Japan, there is that bullish optimism coming through as well. Some of the brokerages say they could see those 62,000 levels on the Nikkei before the year is up. So it looks like the tech theme extension of gains, that's what we're going to be watching in the session today, Paul.
Let's get you some breaking news out of Australia. BlueScope Steel surging in early trade, now better by close to 19%. Now, this is on news that broke last night. BlueScope confirming media rumours that have been swirling that it had received an unsolicited bid from a consortium, including SGH and Steel Dynamics, valuing the company at $30 per share. That would give BlueScope a total valuation of $8.8 billion US. SGH is controlled by the Australian billionaire Kerry Stokes. BlueScope, quite an attractive target. It does get 45% of its revenue from North America. The company's knocked back previous bids, but says it is considering this one. However, the bid is subject to numerous conditions, but shares surging in the early going here in Australia, the best performing stock on the index. Let's take a look at what else has been going on in the US. We did have the S&P climbing. Chevron had a very good day. So did most of the US oil majors on the news flow out of Venezuela. Chevron is, of course, the only U.S. oil major currently operating in Venezuela due to a special license. We also had oil pretty much shrugging off all of these concerns at the end of the day, modestly higher as well. Venezuelan oil exports fell to a 17-month low back in December due to the U.S. blockade. But not all oil prices rose. Canadian heavy crude hit a one-year low on the prospect of a bit of competition, perhaps, coming out of Venezuela. Avril.
Yeah, on that note, we are hearing, of course, how the ousted Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro has faced a U.S. court along with his wife and pleaded not guilty to those narco-terrorism charges. And their appearance before a New York judge sets off this extraordinary legal battle that could have major geopolitical ramifications. Let's get to Washington, and Bloomberg Balance of Power co-anchor Joe Matthew joins us now for more on this. So, Joe, what were you hearing about what's come out of the courthouse in relation to Maduro? Where does this leave his fate?
Well, it's a great question, and you just put your finger on the real headline today, which is a not guilty plea, a red headline in the terminal that may not have come as a surprise. There was a moment, a dramatic moment in the courtroom when Maduro said loudly that he was kidnapped from his home in Caracas and that he was still, in fact, the rightful president of Venezuela. But the fact of the matter is, as Maduro was being hauled into court, Delcy Rodriguez was, in fact, being sworn in by the legislature in Venezuela as acting president. suggesting that this is, in fact, something that the United States supports and is part of in working with Rodriguez, who had some difficult rhetoric for the Trump administration on Saturday, but issued a statement yesterday saying that her regime, if I can call it that, looks to partner and work with the United States as it moves forward here. But there are still huge questions about what happens in this case involving Maduro and his wife, one that could move on for years. He's made his way back to the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is a federal jail in Brooklyn, known as a pretty ugly place to be. This is the jail that held El Chapo, is currently holding Luigi Mangione. Ghislaine Maxwell was there. P. Diddy and Sam Bankman-Fried at times has had no running water and is a far cry, no heat as well at times, a far cry from a presidential palace in Caracas.
Joe, you mentioned Delcy Rodriguez, now acting president in Venezuela, striking a conciliatory, cooperative tone with the Trump administration. But is what she says matching on the ground what's happening in Venezuela?
Well, look, and we also have to remind everybody that the president of the United States says he reserves another strike if this doesn't work out well. So there might be a good reason why this conciliatory tone was being struck by someone. And there we see her on our screen, who demonized the Trump administration on Saturday and said that Maduro was the rightful leader of Venezuela. Now that she's been sworn in as acting president, it is believed that she will be working closely with the U.S. government, with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and others. But it also reminds us of the fact that the rest of the Maduro regime is still there. They only took the head of this government, and in fact there are many folks there who the administration might slowly want to have removed. So this is the beginning of a very confusing situation in which the president says the U.S. is in fact running Venezuela.
Part of the concerns also is the extent in which U.S. oil companies might invest into Venezuela. We're hearing that the U.S. Energy Secretary is set to speak with some of these oil executives. What do we know?
Yeah, he's going to be at a Goldman Sachs energy conference later this week in which the CEOs of the majors will be there. As you mentioned earlier, Chevron is the one U.S. integrated oil company that's doing business in Venezuela. ConocoPhillips and other companies, though, are scheduled to attend this event. It's the Goldman Clean Tech and Utilities Conference, and it's happening in Miami this week. This is apparently where they will sit down and compare notes. President Trump has made it pretty clear that he expects everybody is going to want a piece of this apple, the largest untapped oil reserve, I believe, on the planet. But the smart analysis also tells us that this will require about a $100 billion investment over the course of 10 years to shore up Venezuela's oil infrastructure, which has been dilapidated and let to corrode for many years. So there's going to have to be a major investment before anybody starts making money here, and it could take some time.
All right, our Washington correspondent and co-anchor of Bloomberg Balance of Power, Joe Matthew there. Thanks for joining us. Let's get to our next guest now. Jason Marczak is Vice President and Senior Director at the Atlantic Council's Latin America Center. Jason, thanks for joining us. I just want to pick up with some of the other goings-on today. The U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, says that this is not a U.S. occupation. He's described it as a law enforcement operation. Look, Delcy Rodriguez, nominally the acting president of Venezuela, but who's really in charge at the moment?
Well, Delcy Rodriguez is the acting president of Venezuela. She was sworn in today at the National Assembly. What the U.S. has said insofar as the President Trump's comments on running the country, and Secretary Rubio has clarified this, is that what the U.S. has is it has leverage in Venezuela right now, because if the Delcy Rodriguez does not take the steps outlined by the United States, there is the possibility of not only more attacks but potentially even graver actions than what we saw over the course of the weekend.
Has anything really changed, though? As Joe was pointing out, a lot of the regime Maduro loyalists still in place, and while Delcy Rodriguez, on the one hand, is striking this conciliatory cooperative tone, on the grounds there are reports of Chavista loyalists detaining people, stopping motorists, asking questions. Has anything really changed on the ground, and how do you see this unfolding?
Look, I haven't seen things change on the ground in the last couple days. I mean, just today with the inauguration of the new National Assembly in Venezuela, there were reports of 13 members of international press and media organizations being detained by the Sabine, the secret police in Venezuela. Sabine detentions is something that has historically occurred under the Maduro regime, and we saw that again today with Delcy Rodriguez now as acting president. But what the U.S. will need to do is to hold Rodriguez accountable for actually moving forward on the actions that President Trump has identified as key to U.S. priorities: criminal organizations, getting rid of narcotics trafficking, opening up the oil sector, and stamping out adverse foreign influence.
How exactly do you expect Rodriguez to be in the perhaps months ahead until we see an election engaging with Washington?
She's going to have to walk a very difficult political tightrope, and we saw her do that over the weekend. On Saturday, vehement statements rejecting the U.S. actions. On Sunday, pledging to cooperate with the United States. So she's going to have to do that to maintain the loyalty of the Chavista base, but at the same time avoid further actions by the United States. Insofar as elections, that hasn't been part of the conversation publicly coming from the U.S. Elections will need to occur at a certain point. Those elections and actually bringing in a government that is supported by the people will be fundamental to bringing in that long-term investment that Venezuela needs.
What is your sense on when an election might be held, and if it is held, whether the results will be upheld?
Well, if we want to go by Article 234 of the Venezuelan Constitution, she can remain in the post for 90 days as acting president. That can be renewed for another 90 days. That gives you 6 months, at which point they'd have to be a decision that there's an absolute vacancy of the presidency, in which she would assume, and then elections in 30 days. However, the Supreme Court of Venezuela has said that those rules don't apply, similar to when Chavez passed a decade ago. So there isn't a clear timetable of when elections would need to happen. Now, the key is not to have elections for the sake of elections. There have been elections in the past. There have been elections in Venezuela repeatedly throughout this century, none of which have been free and fair. And so to actually have an election that's respected by the international community, that respects the will of the Venezuelan voters, and that will actually gives security to investors insofar as the government that's in power, those elections need to be free and fair by international standards.
Yeah, Jason, to that point, if an election is held, what happens if, I'm not sure how to phrase this, the wrong people win? Because President Trump's already ruled out a role, for the opposition leader Machado in this process.
Well, he hasn't ruled out Machado in competing in an election. What he's done is he said, look, Delcy Rodriguez is already there in Caracas. We're gonna see if we can play ball with her. Hopefully we can. This is a gamble, but he and Secretary Rubio, Secretary Rubio in particular, has expressed his admiration again for Machado, and so I think that there still is a pathway for Machado and Muno Gonzalez. That pathway will have to be through elections, and those elections would need to be free and fair.
As we pointed out earlier, there are a lot of members of the Maduro regime still entrenched in the bureaucracy and the politics of the country as well. Do you view this as a mistake, or would it have been a mistake to remove them? Because is the U.S. learning some lessons here from Iraq when Saddam Hussein loyalists were cleaned out wholesale and things fell apart very quickly?
Yeah, I mean, first, this is not Iraq. This is Venezuela 2026. This is not Iraq. We don't have boots on the ground. We're not actually governing the country from a day-to-day basis. We're not doing education, healthcare. What the U.S. is doing is exacting its leverage to cajole Delcy Rodriguez to take the actions that are necessary. So it's a very different dynamic from Iraq, and I think the U.S. has learned its lessons insofar as nation building, and this President Trump, is not interested in the business of nation building.
It also feels, though, like this is a this episode a reminder of the Trump administration and the president himself very determined to impose his world order. What is Venezuela going to, how is it going to be engaging with Beijing, with China amid all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, there was a Chinese delegation that was supposedly in Caracas at the time of the operation. Look, I mean, the Venezuela-China relationship. Venezuela had $60 billion in loans from the Chinese. They've been repaying through oil. Most of that had actually been repaid at this point. I think in some ways this is actually an opportunity for China to be able to offload the Venezuela problem now to the U.S., which now essentially owns what happens in Venezuela moving forward. I think this is a first deliverable from President Trump's new national security strategy that has a heavy Western Hemisphere focus, and as part of that focus reflects the importance for the administration on ensuring that foreign powers that are adversarial to the United States don't have a significant footprint in the hemisphere.
Jason, thank you for your time and your analysis today. Great to chat. Jason Marczak is Vice President at the Atlantic Council's Latin America Center. Now, coming up on the Asia Trade, we talk investment strategy with Moneta, who remain cautious on the Magnificent Seven. KB Securities tells us why they believe China could surprise markets with aggressive restructuring this year. And Legora joins us later with the outlook for Australia's AI sector. This is Bloomberg.
This is the Vera CPU. It's got 88 CPU cores, and the CPU cores are designed to be multi-threaded. But the multi-threaded nature of Vera was designed so that each one of the 176 threads could get its full performance. So it's essentially as if there's 176 cores, but only 88 physical cores. So these cores were designed in using a technology called spatial multi-threading. But the I/O performance is incredible.
Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang speaking as the annual CES opens in Las Vegas. Our Asia Tech correspondent Avril is there for us live. So, Belle, you're at the event. What are the big announcements from Nvidia so far?
Yeah, that's right. First time that Asia TV's actually come here to CES, and I have to say it's really at a scale and a magnitude that I hadn't really been able to appreciate. But the final preparations are underway right now as Jensen Huang has actually kicked off CES for 2026, just finishing that keynote in the last 30 minutes or so. But really, one of the biggest announcements he had was around what you were just hearing there, this Rubin architecture. It's essentially the successor to Blackwell. It's a lot more powerful. It can do a lot more with a lot less energy demands as well. So you're getting a bit of a nod to that just in that soundbite we just played. But essentially, he's saying that the production has started. They're going to be ramping that up into the end of 2026. And it has been something designed specifically for gigawatt AI factories. Now, gigawatt AI factories, you're essentially talking as well about what he addressed during that presentation, which is that AI is becoming a lot more complex, and so as a result it needs a lot more compute power, and that's what he's saying, that they're basically preparing these products to address that need. It's interesting, as we ended 2025, we were talking still a lot about those AI bubbles. He didn't address that specifically in the presentation, but I think he did nod to it when he talked about the demand that he's seeing and how essentially the entire computing industry is changing, and that is driving this big shift in R&D budgets as well from companies across a range of different industries. So essentially saying Nvidia is at the center of the AI ecosystem, and again, that demand is very much still there for the company. But interesting to note, of course, Jensen Huang is still talking about these products a lot earlier in the year than he would typically do.
Belle, Jensen Huang was also speaking about autonomous driving. What did he have to say about that?
Yeah, it was a really big focus as well in the earlier part of the presentation, more on that sort of embodied AI or physical AI, and to that end, automotive certainly were a big part. So he's announced what's called the Alpamayo model. So he's saying that this is the world's first thinking, reasoning, autonomous vehicle AI. So I don't want to get too technical on it, but what he's saying is essentially it's solving for the so-called long tail, which is when you're out in the world, you're driving your vehicle, and you come across very messy or unpredictable situations. And so far he's saying that the autonomous driving software technology hasn't really been able to solve for that, but he's saying that Alpamayo will have those capabilities. It'll be able to stop, reason with more human-like capabilities, and then make a decision. And that's what he's saying is going to be the really big difference.
This event that you're at, of course, Belle, is really one of the ones where the biggest names in tech gather. What else are you looking forward to at the event?
Yeah, well, it's the biggest names, and then it's also the names that maybe you haven't heard of before as well, because there's all sorts of innovations that we're expecting to see on display. And I think just thinking about mobility, for instance, that's going to be one of the big focus points of the event. And just behind me is actually a product that I've never seen before, which is a motorcycle with two wheels in the front, one in the back. So it's a reverse trike or a tadpole trike. But what is interesting about it is that it's also an eVTOL or an electric vehicle takeoff and landing vehicle. So expecting to see lots of different innovations on display in the mobility space, but also humanoid service robots. They're going to continue to be key. Announcements around digital health, longevity, energy demands as well, because there's that big question how you're going to meet the power needs of AI and computing. So solutions in solar, wind, small nuclear reactors, for instance, next generation batteries. But then also this move to the edge, which we've been talking about for quite a while now, but should be a big focus of CES this year, this so-called AI everywhere, or edge AI, which is when you have a lot of that sensitive data that ends up being processed locally. And again, just going back to Jensen Huang, he actually did announce or nod to this in his presentation, because he was talking about agentic AI technologies that are going to become a lot more customized. And again, that points to the need for edge AI.
All right, Asia tech correspondent Annabelle Drew is there at the CES event in Las Vegas. And later on Tuesday, hear exclusive insights from Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang and Siemens CEO Roland Busch. They'll be speaking with Bloomberg after taking the stage at CES in Las Vegas. Plenty more from this event as well. You can catch a special edition of Bloomberg Tech Asia this Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. in Hong Kong, or Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. if you're watching from New York. And subscribers can use the function TV Go or watch live on Bloomberg.com. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
The top global headlines we're following. The U.S. and more than 100 countries have finalized an agreement exempting American companies from some foreign taxes. The deal excludes U.S.-based multinational firms from the 15% global minimum tax negotiated through the OECD. It also effectively blocks other countries from imposing more levies on some foreign subsidiaries of U.S. multinationals. Saudi Arabia cutting the price of its flagship crude for Asia for a third month amid signs of oversupply in the market. State producer Saudi Aramco lowered the price of its Arab Light grade to 30-cent premium to the regional benchmark for February. And this comes as OPEC Plus sticks with its plan to pause supply increases in the first quarter. Paul?
Let's take a look at how commodities are tracking. Copper, we need to point out, did top $13,000 a tonne. There's a rush to ship to the US on concerns of future tariff risks. There's also been a number of supply disruptions over recent months, the latest being a strike at a mine in Chile. Oil prices, meanwhile, a little bit softer today. More to come on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Chinese President Xi Jinping and South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung have reaffirmed bilateral ties at their second meeting in 2 months. It's a sign that both sides are working to stabilize relations amid geopolitical tensions. Let's get to our China correspondent Min Min Lo in Hong Kong. So Min Min, tell us a little bit about the tone of the meeting, and there were quite a lot of MOUs signed as well. What came out of it that was concrete?
Yeah, it was pretty positive, I would say, the tone of it, because this is the second meeting in a couple of months, coming just after the two presidents met in South Korea. So the frequency has been quite high, and President Xi pointing to that as a sign of how important the relationship is. And Lee Jae-myung as well, saying that he wants to start a new era of South Korea-China relations, and that 2026 could be the year where we see a full reset of relations. And one of the things that was quite critical, I think, is that Lee Jae-myung managed to secure a resumption of a ministerial level economic dialogue that was frozen since the THAAD missile crisis. So that's an important breakthrough. And when it comes to trade, I think one of the issues that South Korea is concerned about is that their trade surplus with China has turned into a deficit since 2023 as China started to produce more advanced manufacturing domestically. So President Lee was looking to expand trade, especially in areas like AI, like industrial, cultural goods as well. So he cited things like beauty products, like films, games, and so on as potential areas for breakthroughs. And we know that China has put an informal ban on South Korean cultural goods since the THAAD missile crisis as well. This is where the presidential aide of Korea has said it could take some time for that to resume, but they are hopeful that if trust continues to build, we could see perhaps potentially large-scale K-pop concerts being held in Beijing again in the longer term.
That being said, Min, all this is coming against a backdrop of really fraught geopolitical tensions. How exactly is all this shaping China-Korea relations?
Yeah, so this is a tricky thing because it seems like perhaps some of the wins that President Lee Jae-myung had gained is coming at the expense of pressure from China to, quote, stand on the right side of history, because we all know about the China-Japan crisis going on because of Takaichi's comments, and China has been trying to shore up closer ties with South Korea in that crisis, pointing to their efforts during World War II to fight against Japanese militarism together. And President Lee Jae-myung had reaffirmed that South Korea would respect that one China principle. But the other more tricky issue is also North Korea, which fired what is suspected to be ballistic missiles just ahead of that visit. And it's coming after the U.S. has seized President Maduro as well, which some analysts are saying is sending a message to North Korea that it would be suicide for them to abandon their nuclear program. So South Korea has asked for Beijing's help to advance peace in the Korean peninsula, given that they have been a major economic lifeline to North Korea. But at the same time, that denuclearization push is going to be even harder after that Venezuelan crisis. And it is hard to say what China can do to rein in a leader that is as unpredictable as Kim Jong-un.
Right, that's Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Lo there. Getting a little bit more news on the situation in Venezuela. Politico has a report, according to a U.S. official familiar with the matter, that the U.S. has made 3 demands of acting President Delcy Rodriguez in Venezuela. They say they want to see a crackdown on drug flows, kicking out Iranian, Cuban and other operatives of countries or networks that are hostile to Washington, and also stop the sale of oil to U.S. adversaries. Now, this is Politico reporting, according to a U.S. official familiar with the situation. Delcy Rodriguez so far has been cooperative. She doesn't appear to have a lot of choice in the matter. President Trump previously warning that more military action will be coming if Venezuela does not behave. There will be a second strike. Well, former U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross says China and Russia have benefited by getting cheap Venezuelan oil. He told us exclusively that President Trump's vision for a U.S.-led revival of Venezuela's oil industry will be a long, complex and expensive undertaking.
Well, there's a lot that needs to be done. In terms of laws, Venezuela has the weakest property rights laws in the whole world. So that has to be fixed so that you have some assurance of private sector continuing ownership. But I think realistically, companies going in now in a relatively complex situation are probably going to want guarantees against expropriation. And that's not unusual. The U.S. and multinational entities often give expatriation and foreign exchange guarantees. Now, the debt structure is mind-bogglingly complicated. They have about 160 billion of debt altogether, counting expatriation claims, counting funded debt, counting debt for oil, counting everything. Those bonds have been trading in the high teens, low 20s. They could probably be restructured in the 30 to 40 cents on the dollar. So in the overall context, that's not a very big number. And one of the few good things is that the IMF has no exposure to Venezuela, and IMF is entitled to lend up to $50 billion. So they could very well be a source of some funding.
If I can just jump in on that point before we continue, Wilbur, because some of the exposure we do understand comes from China and debt owed to Chinese banks, for example. If there is a restructuring of debt in the country, do you expect the U.S. to exert force of who gets priority in the capital stack? Does it change where back payments and different restructuring comes from, just given the geopolitics of the moment between the U.S. and China?
Right. Well, both the Chinese and the Russians had made loans to Venezuela that are payable at least partly in oil, but oil at very, very advantageous prices to them. So they are part of the problem in that they're getting oil very cheaply out of Venezuela in return for debts that otherwise are never going to be paid. Now, the oil that comes out of Venezuela is mostly what we call heavy oil, and that requires a slightly different refining process from the American shale oil, which is mostly light oil. Both China and India have very strong facilities for processing heavy oil, because a lot of the Iranian oil that they had been getting also is heavy.
Former U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross speaking to Bloomberg's Danny Berger. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Take a look at how futures are shaping up. We are expecting Asia stocks to extend from already those record highs clocked a day ago. Futures on the Nikkei pointing to that upside. We are seeing S&P 500 futures flat. Worth noting that on the Nasdaq 100, we saw it snapping that 5-day slide, and this was supported by a jump in mega caps, including Amazon, Tesla, also keeping track of Nvidia following these comments from the Nvidia chief, Jensen Huang, confirming that Vera Rubin chips will be shipped in the second half. Let's bring in Aoifinn Devitt, Senior Investment Advisor at Moneta, for some analysis on what's to come in markets. Aoifinn, great to see you. We want to focus on tech. I think you think that we might see a bit of that rethink continuing. What do you think that AI play is going to look like in the next couple of weeks?
It's interesting you're mentioning an AI play. It's like almost what AI play? Where our news flow has been dominated by geopolitics and the turn of the year in metals. And now we're back to AI again. So I think the key thing on AI is that the trends we saw at the end of the year are continuing into 2026. There is still that debate as to whether the demand in AI can be sustained, whether the capex is appropriate, and where the winners and losers will be. We're not discussing it right now, generally on the headlines, but that is still a permeating debate. And we at Moneta are advising a diversification beyond tech, beyond the large cap, beyond the US borders, into the global portfolio that we've always advocated for. But we think now more than ever is the time to shore up exposures. You're in Asia there. The Asian market has done extremely well relative to the US and to Europe, and tech has been a big part of that. So we think that if there are ways to get exposure to this beyond the traditional Mag 7 concentration, which has been so dominant in 25.
What exactly are some of the ways you're advocating for Asia?
Yeah, well, Asia we see as part of our general equity bucket, and we have a global equity portfolio that we've always advocated. That would generally not have a high exposure to emerging markets from a US vantage point, but it has enough exposure to provide diversification. We also have always looked at the picks and shovels aspect of AI, and that has been represented in our real assets and private asset segment of a client portfolio, and that has always been global. I will say that Asia has not been a large percentage of private asset portfolios, but we think that should grow. It'll depend on opportunities and how they are presented essentially within those global portfolios. But I would say that there's a very open mind. We've gone from clients looking at China as perhaps being uninvestable, something they should avoid, to really piquing interest again, especially towards the end of 25, and the numbers have told that story.
Even inevitably, when we have these conversations, there is a discussion of bubbles, risk, overspending, overvaluation. Are there any pockets of the market that do look a little bit risky to you when it does come to the AI story?
I'd say the basic AI story is it actually fraught with risk right now. And how we are translating that for clients is to think about the concentration and the risk that we can expect from an equity portfolio. That has fundamentally changed over the last 18 months. When the concentration has risen as it has, when we have individual companies like, say, Alphabet, Nvidia, when their market cap is just so large relative to other entire country bourses, that's when we have to think that this portfolio is going to behave differently. So we would say that the entire, actually, even just a passive equity exposure is going to have a different risk-reward profile. We have to ask clients, is this what you expect from your equity portfolio? Are you content to settle for less than shooting the lights out, less than participating in indices? Are you prepared to settle for a steady single-digit return that compounded, can be less volatile, and ultimately deliver according to your goals? So I think getting away from those high-risk sectors, at least diversifying and diluting their presence within a portfolio.
We were talking about the geopolitical tension earlier. We've seen a bit of a rally in defence stocks as well, but we have a chart on the Bloomberg terminal that indicates some of the run-up that these defence names have had, but they do have a bit of a mixed record when it comes to holding on to some of those gains. So how enduring do you see this rally in defence names being?
This is probably the only sector that we see being most, I'd say, dependent on the geopolitical headlines. It was interesting that the defence stocks in Europe have done so well. That's been really, I'd say, quite a sustained trajectory until whenever we see rumours that there will be perhaps peace in Ukraine, that sadly is not on the horizon yet. But when we do see it coming into a higher probability, those defence stocks do fall away. And I would say that that's perhaps suggesting there's too much momentum in these stocks right now. There's no reason this should fall away. The investment in defence is a long-term strategic shift that we have not seen for decades in Europe and is now fundamentally changed given the way the New World Order is being rearranged, essentially, even in the last few weeks. So I would say that they are long-term trends. We are bullish generally on defence stocks. The rearming of the world is not necessarily a good thing for humankind, but it is, I think it's inevitable given the way new alliances are being drafted. So that is a sustained trajectory, we believe, but there will be volatility as it does move around with the geopolitical headlines.
How much volatility are you expecting on tech if you're saying that maybe there's more pain to come down the road? And what might some of the implications cross assets be if we see that unwinding?
One of the themes that we've been developing at Moneta for 2026 is this idea of enough or saturation point. We already know that consumers are clamoring for more affordability. We also know that there is more pushback around AI from a moral standpoint, a heightened focus on the ethics of rolling this out so quickly, and equally looking around the world, in your region, Australia, with the social media ban for under 16s, that's been looked at with extreme interest by certain jurisdictions and certain states, even within the US. So that we are going to see that create a new currency, and it's certainly a momentum building around that, as there has been such a rapacious build of AI and really little time to pause and little regulatory pushback. So we see 2026 being a year of saturation and a year of enough. That will also threaten data center build. We've already seen some pullback around financing of data centers in the US, a hesitation of some of the private credit players to step up more equity for some of those build-outs. We've also seen communities push back, and that being a populist cry to push back on data center build because it threatens electricity supply and pricing in that region, and that affects affordability. So these are more subtle pushbacks to tech that we see growing in importance in 2026.
Where does all this leave energy-related stocks?
Actually, the story, a bit like the defense stock story, the story for energy is resoundingly positive. What we do know is looking at, say, the clean energy index, that was up over 40% in 2025. A very surprising result, I would say, looking at the invariable headwinds that there were from the Trump administration towards clean energy. The fact that clean energy could do so well when oil was so weak shows that there is a strong demand for energy around the world. That is very much being driven not only by AI, but by the pace of economic growth, and therefore being long energy stocks. And even in the oil side, even though the oil price has been depressed, this news around Venezuela, the idea that there is going to be a reclaiming of stolen oil, whatever the narrative is woven, this would generally open up opportunities for some of the oil majors. So I would say between the sustainable energy story and that, it is a strong picture for energy stocks in the year ahead.
Aoifinn, really good to get your thoughts on the markets in the year ahead. Aoifinn Devitt is Senior Investment Advisor at Moneta. Now, speaking of energy stocks, they were among the sectors that did well in Japan as well just a day ago. But overall, stocks there hit a record. And this was, of course, the first day of trading this year. CEOs of the country's biggest brokerages predicting that the best is yet to come. Let's bring in our Japan equities reporter, Alice French. So, Alice, we're hearing a lot of bullishness from these brokerages. What are they saying are the factors that are going to be driving this for the rest of the year?
Morning. Yes, as you say, there's a lot of bullishness, a lot of optimism starting this 2026. We had the CEO of Daiwa predicting that the Nikkei might even go as far as 62,000 by the end of this year, which, considering it only hit 50,000 kind of partway through last year, is a pretty big bet. It seems that a lot of the optimism is being driven by this continued momentum behind corporate reform, right? So we know that Japan's corporate governance code is up for revision again this summer. People particularly expecting that companies' cash holdings are going to be targeted this time. So we've already seen, quite a few movements towards more capital efficiency. We've seen things like cross-shareholdings being targeted, and that's really drawn in a lot of investor interest, particularly from activists and from foreign investors. That is expected to continue this year. And also just overall corporate performance, right? These brokerages and analysts are expecting profits to go up this year. I think that's partly because of a weaker than expected yen, which of course is good news for exporters. But yeah, overall, we've started the year with a bang, and it seems like the optimism is set to continue for a while.
So a weekend, expectation of higher profits. Is there anything else driving all the New Year's optimism?
Yeah, so domestically, right, we've got Prime Minister Takaichi, and we know that she has these big fiscal spending plans. Now, people are expecting those to help sectors from things like quantum computing to construction through to, of course, AI and things like defense. So all of that extra government spending is expected to be a tailwind for a lot of sectors. Now, of course, Takaichi will have to balance that with the kind of potential fiscal burden and the jitters in the bond market that we saw a lot last year. But overall, there's optimism for that government spending. Of course, there's also AI. We can't not talk about it. And in Japan, there are a lot of robotics makers, for example. We know that we've seen this sort of shift towards physical AI. SoftBank has been making some bets on that in the past few months, for example. So robotics firms like Yaskawa Electric, for example, Fanuc expected to do well on that bullishness this year. But we'll see how it goes. There are lots of different areas of the market that investors are expecting to kind of outperform their global peers this year.
What are the potential factors that could derail all this? What are the downside risks?
Right. Whilst there's a lot of optimism, we've also, of course, got to think that it can't all be good news. And I mean, just yesterday we had some data out from department stores, for example, showing that tourist spending is going down. Now, we know that, China and Japan do still have this ongoing diplomatic spat after Takaichi's comments on Taiwan. That does seem to be hitting Chinese tourism here. And we know that Chinese tourists are one of the biggest spenders in Japan. Of course, inbound tourism up at record levels in 2025, expected to continue this year. That had really been a tailwind for consumer stocks, department stores, of course, but also retail things like fast retailing, Uniqlo, Muji, all of those kind of tourist favorites. Now, we may see that weigh on those retail stocks today. It'll be interesting to see how they perform because they had already dropped quite a lot towards the end of last year. And of course, we have the volatility that Aoifinn was just talking about, that we've already seen sell-offs in AI stocks. There is kind of this sense of perhaps a little bit of overvaluation or overbuying that could continue to weigh on some of those outperforming tech stocks. And of course, the backdrop to all of this is the yen, where we know there's been volatility. It's weaker than a lot of people had expected going into 2025. Let's see how it plays out this year. But, that has a big impact on stocks. And of course, while the weak yen is good for exporters, it does tend to weigh more on those kind of domestically focused stocks. So there are definitely some things to keep an eye on. But overall, the mood is definitely optimism. And it's been a good new year so far.
All right, Japan stocks reporter Alice French there. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
The latest from the corporate front, Tesla's China factory shipments fell 7% in 2025 despite a last-minute bump in December. Preliminary data from China's Passenger Car Association show the automaker shipped more than 851,000 vehicles last year from its Shanghai plant. Tesla is struggling with a slowdown in global sales, losing its title as the world's largest EV maker to China's BYD. Bloomberg has learned that Goldman Sachs is raising a Japan real estate fund targeting about $500 million for property deals. Sources say Goldman has been pitching investors in recent months looking to take advantage of a resurgence in Japan's property market, something we'll continue tracking. This is Bloomberg. This is the Asia trade. We're counting down to Asia's major market opens. Of course, Paul, we did see markets in the region just a day ago managing to shrug off those geopolitical concerns, reaching the region's benchmark record highs. AI enthusiasm still flowing through and perhaps also supported by some of these comments from the Nvidia chief, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Normal service resumed there. Nvidia also confirming that it's got some of those new chips heading for production. We'll bring you more on that story in a moment. But that AI narrative just keeps rolling on. Never mind geopolitical tension.
As we keep track of that, let's take a look at how Asia markets are shaping up, particularly in Japan. We do have a 10-year auction for JGBs, and with yields at these levels, something that it might be enough to draw in short-term investors. Despite those lingering concerns about inflation and the idea of the BOJ being behind the curve, you are seeing yields for the moment moving a little lower. In terms of stocks, we saw it being supported by not just tech names just a day ago, but also energy, financial-related stocks, something to keep track on in the session as well. Take a look at how South Korea is faring in the early goings. We do have local media reports that the likes of SK Hynix and Samsung are looking at potential price hikes for their DRAM, the server DRAM. So again, another potential bullish signal when it comes to the tech sector. We are seeing a bit of a reversal for the Kospi, though, for the moment, despite reaching those record highs just a day ago, Paul.
It was a good day for U.S. markets as well. We saw the S&P climbing. Chevron had its best day since April. The oil company up more than 5%. Let's take a look at our bonds are tracking as well. The yield on the 10-year just ticking up a little bit. We did see an unexpected drop for the ISM manufacturing gauge in December, and that did help yields move a little lower in the U.S. But we do get jobs numbers later on this week. It's going to be the first clean jobs report we've had since that 6-week shutdown, and that's going to be key in terms of predicting the next moves from the U.S. Federal Reserve. Crude prices, meanwhile, slipping a little bit, but we did see oil markets broadly shrugging off all of that news flow out of Venezuela. Venezuelan oil exports, meanwhile, did fall to a 17-month low back in December due to the U.S. blockade. Avril.
Yeah, we saw overnight how tech bounced back. We're tracking Nvidia as well because its chief, Jensen Huang, says their highly anticipated new Rubin data center products are nearing release this year. Speaking at CES in Las Vegas, Huang said customers will soon be able to try out the technology, helping speed up AI development.
This is the Vera CPU. It's got 88 CPU cores, and the CPU cores are designed to be multi-threaded. But the multi-threaded nature of Vera was designed so that each one of the 176 threads could get its full performance. So it's essentially as if there's 176 cores, but only 88 physical cores. So these cores were designed in using a technology called spatial multi-threading. But the I/O performance is incredible.
Our Bloomberg tech co-anchor Ed Ludlow joins us live from the event in Las Vegas. So, Ed, a couple of things top of mind from what the Nvidia CEO has been talking about, but I think the Vera Rubin confirmation really stands out.
Yeah, that's the news headline. Vera Rubin has entered full production. And it's important because Nvidia commits to this annual cadence, having a new generation of GPU or high-performance compute system every year. The Vera Rubin system, if you try and do it as a like-for-like with Blackwell, 1 gigawatt of capacity in a data center with Vera Rubin has 10 times the throughput of a Blackwell system, but it generates tokens at 1/10 of the cost. So if you are one of the hyperscalers selling that service and that gear, or you're a frontier AI lab that is training the model or running inference, it's a massive change in the economics for you. But also generation to generation, Nvidia owns more of the content of a server rack and the server design as a whole. Every generation that comes out, they go from having owned just the GPU to basically the full content of what's in there, which will impact margins going forward. What I would say is that after his big on stage moment, he huddled with analysts and confirmed that this will likely ship in the second half of this year, which they'd already said anyway in November. But it gave the market some confidence in the moment. The stock was a little negative in after hours. It came up, it ended up flat.
Yeah, Ed, news comments from Nvidia so closely watched. Is there a risk the market could be disappointed in what it heard?
There is a serious risk. There were several notes going into this keynote that this was the start of the year. This was going to launch 2026 for the AI story. And even though this is called the Consumer Electronics Show, this was about infrastructure, the highest level infrastructure. And we didn't really get the same level of forecast or big picture that we had from other Nvidia events last year, like at GTC and DC in October, where Jensen kind of almost off script told us how much revenue they would get from those new combined systems. That said, it's a 4-day kind of thing, and Jensen Huang is here. We have more comments from him after the keynote confirming different things, and then we'll speak to him on Bloomberg Television tomorrow, right? So it's a situation where you brace for headlines, but really interested to see how the sell side and the buy side reacts to that keynote in the morning.
Ed, some of these headlines about Nvidia addressing the concerns about demand from China as well.
Yep. Analysts have had a chance to speak with Jensen, and analysts have been asking him about recent news reports. Here's the situation with H200. Jensen confirmed that Nvidia has submitted the licenses to the US government to export H200 to China. The government is reviewing those licenses. It's important to note that when a license application goes in, it can sit on someone's desk at the Commerce Department for a very long time. And so there may be a muted sort of reaction by the markets to that. On the demand side, Jensen Huang said, there is great demand in China, which would counter the reports that have come out of China that at least the government has put pressure on those domestic tech names to use the domestic option. But for now, it's very much a wait and see. And again, I think it's one of the questions people will continue to ask here over a couple of days. He was also asked a little bit about the Grok acquisition that's not really an acquisition, maybe an acqui-hire. And he was talking about how they might do something very unique and specific together, but that Grok was struggling to find its place in AI. Remember, Grok had a very inference-focused platform. And right now, the situation is the CEO and its COO are heading to Nvidia with some kind of licensing deal for the tech. It would be interesting if they bring a new platform-specific product that's new to market, but it's maybe something we find out about in the coming days.
Ed, thanks for putting things in context for us. Bloomberg Tech co-anchor Ed Ludlow at the CES in Las Vegas. Now, we're also tracking some of the stocks related to Nvidia. It's a bit mixed for the moment. Declines on the likes of Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, but of course, they did do pretty well just a day ago. Overall, chips in the rest of the region still look to be quite supported. We are also tracking some of the moves related to Hyundai. It has talked about some of this new developments related to its humanoid robot and developments surrounding its Boston Dynamics unit. So we are seeing that extension of gains. Hyundai Motors is up 7+%. Now let's bring in our next guest who sees increasing risks of stagflation and expects U.S. stocks to end 2026 in negative territory. With us now is Peter Kim, Global Investment Strategist at KB Securities. Peter, good to see you as always. We've just been talking to our colleague Ed Ludlow, who's at the tech event in Las Vegas, the CES. There's still a lot of, I suppose, optimism surrounding AI, chip-related stocks, but you see that risk of reversal for tech in the U.S. What is behind that view?
I think the fervor that we've seen for the past couple of years on AI is probably not even half over. I think it's now a matter of how much the prices and expectations are priced in. Also, increasingly, who's the bigger beneficiary? Is it now Asia or the US? And I think that's probably the question, but I hardly think that we should be worrying about the end of the AI boom. I mean, the investments that are being pledged into the technology is only started.
Is that why you see the chance of continued outperformance in South Korea stocks for this year, despite what we saw already in 2025?
Absolutely. I mean, during this early stage of the investment cycle of a transformative technology like AI, the hardware is the safest place to be. We have to remember that oversupply situation is still probably 2-3 years away on the memory chips. At this stage, not only are companies striving for dominance in this sector, but also the countries. I mean, China wants to dominate, not just for its sector, but as a supremacy on a national basis. So I feel very comfortable. I was here a few months ago saying how the technology boom is going to extend well into 26, and I still hold on to that belief.
So, Peter, what's the best way to get exposure to this then? Because some of the names, particularly the Magnificent Seven, are looking pretty expensive. So where do you look? Do you look at those big names? Do you look at China? Do you look at SK Hynix, picks and shovels, energy companies, or an ETF? What's your preferred method to allocate?
As I said, for now, I think semiconductors is the safest place to be. We have to remember that as much as the long-term demand outlook for AI may be a little uncertain, the supply constraints on the semiconductors is already proven. And I think it'll be 1 or 2 years before we start to have that supply catch up to the current demand outlook. And therefore, that's why I think the Korean semiconductors, and probably at some point, perhaps some of the hyperscalers coming from Asia might be interesting as a second stage, but I still believe that it's as a risk reward. Semiconductors is going to be a very good place to be for investors.
All right, and in terms of the China story, do you anticipate any reforms or support for the local heroes of the chip-making industry in China?
I mean, China's got a bigger problem where it's declining domestic economy, the overcapacities in many sectors, the involution. These are all structural problems. So as much as exciting the technology sector is, I think the policymakers from China would be very cognizant of not falling into the same supply glut that they've seen in autos and so many other industries. So it's a tricky one. Certainly they're striving for tech supremacy is there, but overdoing it, I think, has led to many problems. So I think they want to continue to try to see the right balance rather than going all in.
Does that mean we might have to wait a while longer for a bit of a pro-stimulus approach from Chinese authorities? And what is that going to mean for the trajectory for the rest of the year for Chinese stocks?
Yeah, so China has gone through a very, very difficult phase last year with the tariff war, slowing domestic economy, and they've one way of resolving that has been to just export their way out. We've seen their exports to U.S. decline, but conversely, the rest of the world has more than compensated on the export side. However, now going to this year, I think they need to provide some sort of a backstop on structural reform in order to provide a better runway, rather than just sort of, going for what we consider to be profitless growth and the export side. So I do expect there to be more reform, but probably not so much that it leads to a recession of any kind. So again, it'll be a little more balanced approach rather than just trying to find time by going for export growth.
What is your sense of the extent in which Asia can outperform versus global U.S. peers this year?
So last year, we've had a lot of debate about U.S. dollar depreciation as the anchor for emerging market stocks. Now, again, I've mentioned a few months ago that I consider this U.S. dollar weakening to be more cyclical rather than structural. Now that the U.S. dollar has stabilized, perhaps we need to see more earnings coming through from the EM stocks. And I think it's a good foundation. I think the valuations are supportive relative to U.S. Earnings have started to pick up, and certainly in Korea, we've had earnings really looking good. So I think perhaps this time it may be more earnings driven rather than currency or macro like we have seen last year.
All right, Peter Kim, Global Investment Strategist at KB Securities. Thanks so much for joining us today with your insights. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Ousted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has faced a U.S. court along with his wife, pleading not guilty to narco-terrorism charges. Their appearance before a New York judge sets off an extraordinary legal battle with major geopolitical ramifications. Let's bring in Bloomberg managing editor Jill Deese. So, Jill, Maduro in court saying he's innocent, saying he's a decent man. What else are we hearing there?
Well, Avril, this is an extraordinarily complicated case, as you can imagine. Obviously, after this, as they were arraigned in court, Maduro and his wife continuing to assert their innocence. The U.S., of course, accusing them of sort of leading this operation that effectively exported thousands of tons of cocaine to the United States. As you mentioned, this host of narco-terrorism charges. Really, though, at this point, the question is ultimately going to become more about, whether Maduro was an illegitimate leader or the leader of a sovereign nation who shouldn't have been, sort of taken from Venezuela, brought to the United States to face these charges. His attorney is Barry Pollock. Actually, some of his former clients include Julian Assange. You've got, again, just a very extraordinary case here. We'll have to see ultimately how this develops. But yes, I mean, certainly I think it's no surprise there that Maduro is asserting his influence. If this does end up turning into, say, a jury trial, I think we're in for something that is even more incredibly complex.
Yeah, well, Jill, back in Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez now sworn in as acting president. She's been striking a conciliatory tone with the U.S., but really, does she have a lot of choice here?
Well, I think at this point, Paul, it's, very, very complicated situation here. She, of course, was criticizing the United States when Maduro was first taken out of the country over the weekend. But Trump has made clear that, he says, potentially we could work with this regime. He hasn't pushed for full-scale regime change if you're leaving some of these Maduro loyalists, including Rodriguez, in power. So, perhaps that conciliatory tone makes sense there. But at the same time, you're looking at some of the things that are happening on the ground in Venezuela. She was sworn into office as acting president, but you're still seeing, some pretty heavy military presence in Venezuela on those streets, including from the colectivos, some of those military armed, members. So you do have a question about whether or not this actually is something that it results in a situation where the U.S. can work with Venezuela without actually being on the ground there. Again, really, really difficult to underestimate just how complex the situation really is.
We're hearing how Trump is instructing Marco Rubio to kind of lead the way when it comes to some of the reforms he wants to see, both economically, politically, in Venezuela. What else do we know about the team that is going to be perhaps enforcing or encouraging some of these changes that the U.S. wants to see in the country?
Yes, this is enormously, again, a complicated situation here, Avril. I think one of the things to really look at, too, is just in terms of how, oil companies ultimately get involved here. You've got Trump's energy secretary that's actually going to a conference in Miami later, where you've got some of the major oil companies there, including ConocoPhillips and Chevron, which is the only U.S. supermajor that actually operates in Venezuela at this point. Of course, to have any kind of further involvement in Venezuela is a really, really difficult subject to broach here. While they do have the world's largest oil reserves, the actual energy infrastructure in Venezuela is incredibly compromised and would potentially take tens of billions of dollars over a period of many years to rebuild here. So whether or not you actually see increased investment from some of these oil majors, or in some cases people getting into there, for the first time, I think is a bit difficult to parse. But certainly the Trump administration has a very vested interest in trying to see that kind of production and increase and that infrastructure be restored.
All right, Bloomberg managing editor Jill Desis there. Chinese President Xi Jinping and South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung have reaffirmed bilateral ties at their second meeting in 2 months. It's a sign that both sides are working to stabilize relations as they face a range of geopolitical tensions. Let's get to our China correspondent Min Lo in Hong Kong now. So, Min, what were the key outcomes from this meeting?
Yeah, pretty substantial. The two sides signed at least 14 MOUs on a range of issues, and President Lee Jae-myung was particularly keen to expand trade with China, especially given that South Korea's trade surplus with China has turned into a deficit since 2023, and the concern is that that deficit could become entrenched. So he cited areas like AI, like consumer goods, cultural goods. So he cited examples of beauty products, films, and games as potential areas for breakthroughs in the future. And we know that China has, of course, placed that informal ban on on South Korean cultural goods, pop concerts, and the like, pretty much since the missile crisis in 2016. And the presidential aide of South Korea said it could still take a while for China to lift that ban, but they're hopeful that things are stabilizing, and if trust continues to build, we could soon see pop concerts, K-pop concerts soon resuming in Beijing in the longer term. But have a listen to what the South Korean president said when he met with President Xi yesterday.
It's only been 2 months, but I have that feeling that I'm meeting an old friend I haven't seen for a long time. It's quite cordial and heartwarming.
For thousands of years, South Korea and China, as friendly neighbours, have forged friendly relations. I am ready to follow the trend of the times and work together with President Xi to usher in a new chapter in the development of South Korea and China ties.
There you go. So he is looking at the summit as a potential turning point and citing 2026 as potentially the year where we could see a full restoration of China-South Korean relations.
That balancing act. Min Min, thank you so much. Much appreciated. Bloomberg's China correspondent Min Min Lo for us. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Following, the US and more than 100 countries have finalized an agreement exempting American companies from some foreign taxes. The deal excludes US-based multinational firms from the 15% global minimum tax negotiated through the OECD. It also effectively blocks other countries from imposing more levies on some foreign subsidiaries of US multinationals. Saudi Arabia is cutting the price of its flagship crude for Asia for a third month amid signs of oversupply in the market. State producer Saudi Aramco lowered the price of its Arab Light crude grade to 30% premium to the regional benchmark for February. It comes as OPEC Plus sticks with its plan to pause supply increases in the first quarter. Stay with us. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Take a look at this chart on the Bloomberg terminal. It was a very good day for Chevron and many of the other US oil majors as well. Chevron up 5%, but here's some context. That pink line right at the bottom of the screen there, that is Chevron, and you can see today's 5% bump doesn't look very big when you compare it to Chevron's Asia rivals, massively outperformed by CNOOC, PetroChina and INPEX as well. Obviously an opportunity here, though, for US oil majors in Venezuela in terms of investment. President Trump is determined to see this happen. However, the infrastructure is severely degraded by decades of neglect. Probably going to need tens of billions of dollars in capex over a period of years to get things up to speed. Exxon, ConocoPhillips haven't really responded to requests for comments. There's some opportunities for sure, but also obvious questions around security and political risk in Venezuela. Avril.
Yeah, it remains to be seen how much money these oil giants might be willing to pump into Venezuela. Certainly, the commodity oil has been in focus as the U.S. capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro certainly grabbed headlines and perhaps opened some of these new fronts for geopolitical risk. For more on the outlook for oil, let's bring in Stephen Stepchinsky, who leads our Asia energy coverage. Stephen, what was interesting was we saw that gain, and in Asia, oil prices mostly holding on to that, but it wasn't a massive move. Markets right about this, you think?
I think we're definitely in a wait-and-see situation. There are two ways you could play what's been happening in Venezuela. One is it's bullish for prices because it injects geopolitical risk. It could reduce production in the country, or it could also add some risk to maybe the U.S. hitting other countries that are oil producers. There's been a lot of chatter on Twitter and other social media about what's happening in Iran, what's happening in other countries. So that could be something that the market looks at. They're kind of hedging that risk there. The other way you look at it is this clears the way for the U.S. to remove their sanctions and their blockade, essentially, on the shadow fleet ships and on the exports of sanctioned crude out of Venezuela. That would add more supply into the market. But then when you take a zoom out and you look at this in a really macro view, Venezuela is really not that big in the grand scheme of things. They produce less than 1% of global oil supply. While they do have vast reserves, it isn't clear whether or not Trump will be able to convince the Chevrons, the Exxons, those folks into investing in the country, the tens of billions of dollars that's required to really pump up that production.
Yeah, Stephen, tell us a little bit more about that. What sort of investment would be required? What sort of time frame would it happen over? And critically, I guess, what sort of security guarantees would there need to be?
Well, so when you speak to the analysts, you get all sorts of numbers, but I think the general view is that it's going to take about $10 billion per year over the next decade to get Venezuela back to where it was producing in the past. Now, to give you some context, Venezuela produces about 800,000 barrels per day of oil. Now, when you look at the early 2000s, it was closer to 3 million barrels per day. And when you look at the 70s, it was 4 million barrels per day. So when Trump is talking about reviving this oil production, he's looking more at 3 million barrels. That's a more than tripling of production where we are right now. The reason why production has come down so much over the last 2 decades or so is because there hasn't been investment in infrastructure. It's because the country has been dealing with corruption, and also the sanctions have reduced a lot of the output as well, and customers requiring the fuel, and that reduced the amount of rigs on the ground as well. So to get us back up there, it's going to cost billions of dollars, and it's also going to take essentially a decade to get back here. Now, President Trump said on NBC earlier today that he's looking at getting this up and running, whatever that were to mean, in 18 months, which is really against what the view of analysts in the market says, which is going to take quite a bit longer.
Stephen, thank you so much for your insights on this. Stephen Stepczynski, who leads our Asia energy coverage. Now, traders will also be watching today's 10-year Japanese government bond auction closely, with demand key to avoiding shocks across the curve. Bloomberg FX and rate strategist Devitt joins us now for more. David, what are we expecting in terms of demand, given where yields are on the 10-year?
Yeah, we think, again, you never know in these scenarios, but it's anticipated that demand will be quite decent for today's auction. The bid to cover ratio for the most recent auction last year in December was actually very good. So yeah, anything about the mid 3 to 4, so 3.5, should we say, could certainly be established today, particularly with yields higher. So you're looking at the 10 years about 2.12, 2.11. So that's the highest since you have to go back to the late 1990s. GSO yields at that level. So the market would anticipate good demand. Again, if there is weak demand, though, then that certainly doesn't bode well for the 30-year auction, which is due out on Thursday. So the market certainly could be looking at how this reacts, how the market reacts to this one, given that the 30-year is looming. And if today doesn't go well, as said, the market will assume that, well, it doesn't bode well for Thursday's auction either.
David, tell us about the yen as well. It's very weak. It's very range-bound. Is there anything that could move the needle for the Japanese currency?
Yeah, if you're looking at the dollar yen, which most people obviously focus on, it has been this basically 155 to 158 range since mid-November. Obviously, we know the BOJ hiked. The market shrugged its shoulders and said, I need more than that. With the market already pricing 2 more BOJ hikes this year and dollar yen still in that range, then really I think the question becomes, if the yen is to rally or dollar yen fall, it really comes to the dollar side of the equation. And with that in mind, you're looking for the US data, which is coming out this week, which heavily will be focused on US payrolls on Friday and US CPI next week. But certainly the payroll data, if that comes in weaker than expected, I think it's like average around 65,000 they're looking for. Say that comes in a negative number, then we know the markets are very happy to price in Fed rate cuts. They price in about 60 basis points of rate cuts so far this year. They'll happily add on to that and price in 3 quarter-point rate cuts if given a chance. If that was to happen, then obviously that would put pressure on the dollar across the board, but obviously the yen would benefit from that. So I think in the near term, really it's the dollar side of the equation that the market's focused on for dollar yen.
What are we seeing in terms of the haven qualities in the greenback? Of course, there's been a rethink of that, even with the geopolitical backdrop.
Yeah, so the haven, it does sometimes, it depends on how it all plays out in the markets. I mean, at the end of the day, if there is a sudden market shock, the yen, the Swiss franc, and the dollar does tend to do well in the near-term reaction. Having said that, you're looking at more, at the moment, US equities rallying, so you go, there's no idea of like, well, okay, there's a haven demand, therefore. But then there is a logic, well, do I invest in US then? Because US equity rallying, so other equities as well. But the idea, I think, this year in terms of what does US growth become, I think that becomes a key factor, and how does that US growth play out compared to other countries. And I think that will impact more in terms of this sort of haven trades, because at the moment it's really a risk-on trade that you're seeing in the market.
David, thanks very much. We'll watch as well the 10-year auction results in Japan today. As you said, Bloomberg FX and rate strategist Devitt Finity. Now, let's take a look at how Asia stocks are faring, specifically Japan, South Korea. Yesterday, we saw the Kospi at those record highs, supported by the chip-related stocks. They're going the other direction today. What is doing well is Hyundai Motor, which at one point rose, 8% against a backdrop of its unveiling humanoid robots. We are seeing it erase some of those gains for the moment. But what's also interesting is this divergence we're seeing between Japan and South Korea. What is pulling ahead in Japan? We're seeing the bank-related names also doing well on top of what the chip stocks, including Tokyo Electron, I should say, are doing. And we'll be also talking to the Hyundai Motor Group Vice President and Head of Robotics Lab, Dong Jin-hyun, on Thursday from the CES in Las Vegas. Ahead of that, you can also catch a special edition of Bloomberg Tech Asia this Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. in Hong Kong, or Tuesday, 7:30 p.m. if you're watching from New York. Subscribers can use the function TV Go or watch live on Bloomberg.com. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
As investors pile into the AI boom, Australia is attracting massive bets from global tech giants. Just last month, OpenAI partnered with Next-DC to build a large computing cluster in Sydney. Amazon, Microsoft and Blackstone are also planning to pour billions of dollars into local data centres. The government's new national AI roadmap aims to boost investment, expand skills and embed AI across public services. Well, Swedish AI startup Legora is also rapidly expanding in Australia. The company, valued at $1.8 billion, aims to tackle the legal grunt work by automating tasks like contract review and due diligence. And joining us now is Legora Asia Pacific and Japan lead, Heather Paterson. Heather, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
You've recently completed a Series C funding, $150 million. What's the plan for the money?
We are rapidly expanding globally, and just having started in Australia last June, we're expecting to go from when it was just me to a team the size of 50 at this time June this year. We are seeing globally a huge appetite for legal AI. Firms like Linklaters, White & Case that are looking at how to use the technology to differentiate, and even locally a huge amount of competition here in the Australian market with firms like Minter Ellison and Allens that are looking at how to use the technology to expand their services.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that? How is AI applied in the legal industry? How is it used?
Well, if you think back to 2023, there was, I guess, fairly rudimentary tasks being done by AI. And at the time, Goldman Sachs predicted that 40% of legal tasks could be completed with AI. And we're really seeing that play out today with ever-increasing complexity our technology being used to complete ever-increasing complex tasks. And what that actually turns into is not just review, not just translation, but automating end-to-end tasks using AI. Take an M&A process, for example. Previously, you may have only ever been able to review a subset of contracts as part of that process. And when it's time-bound, highly pressured, and a very strategic and confidential process, now law firms are able to provide that end-to-end review and apply their judgment.
Heather, Avril in Singapore here. To your point, I mean, even as we see these use cases, perhaps some lingering concerns about AI applications in such sensitive sectors such as legal sphere. What are you hearing in terms of how much convincing needs to be done? What's being done to sort of address some of these concerns?
Yeah, so I think with legal AI, it's not about if you are adopting AI, but what are you adopting? And to your point about the concerns around the use of AI, Legora, we really focus on ensuring there's the human in the loop, ensuring that there is the right security, the right privacy, and part of that is actually about not just buying AI, but how you adopt it. And what we're seeing firms really focus on when they work with Legora and when they choose to partner with us, it's about that change management process and how they are increasing AI literacy so that lawyers understand that this is just a tool in the toolkit from which they should apply their judgment and strategic guidance.
And you look after a number of markets across the Asia-Pacific, including Japan. I wonder, do you see a bit of differentiation in terms of the uptake and how open some of these firms are to the technology?
Yeah, look, I actually think there's an incredible appetite across the Asia-Pacific region, and in individual markets themselves, the law firms that are the most ambitious, the first question we get asked is, hey, Heather, how can we adopt this quicker? How can we take our lawyers on this journey so that they understand the basics, but then they can access what the full capability of the platform and the models that, that support it are? So across the region, certainly we see big competition here locally in Australia, but Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, there's an incredible amount of interest because of the momentum.
Do you need to adapt your AI tools depending on which country they're being applied in? And is it a process of continuous adaptation as laws evolve and new laws get passed?
Look, I think that's a great question. Actually, it's not. I wouldn't say that there's a difference from a jurisdiction perspective, but it's about embedding it into your local way of working. And so, firm-specific knowledge is going to get embedded into these tools as part of these more complex workflows.
I have to ask you the scary question, which is this going to put a whole lot of lawyers out of work?
Oh, I love this question, actually, because I think there's a great news story, and this is the best time to be a lawyer, actually. There's a huge amount of job creation in what we're seeing a trend on AI lawyers. And so firms that we're working with are now taking their lawyers that are practicing, whichever practice group it might be, but they're also got this interest in AI and understanding as to what it can do. And when you compare that together, it's really about how you're unlocking the capability within that practice group. And it's the same for Legora. We're hiring legal engineers, which is a new job that didn't exist just 2 years ago.
All right, Heather, thanks for joining us. That is Heather Paterson, Asia Pacific and Japan lead at Legora. And we've got more on Australia ahead. That's every Tuesday, 11:40 a.m. if you're watching in Sydney. That's 8:40 a.m. in Hong Kong. Also, you can tune into the Bloomberg Australia podcast, which delves into the biggest stories shaping the country's role in global business. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, or Bloomberg.com. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
You're watching the Asia trade. Now, the region's equity capital markets are expected to have another blockbuster year in 2026. Long dormant IPO plans coming back to life with major offerings expected from Chinese tech companies, including Baidu and Zepto. Bloomberg's Julia Fioretti joins us now for more. Julia, what are we expecting across Asia in terms of listings for the year?
Well, Avril, we're expecting another blockbuster year, as you said. As to whether the volumes will even exceed last year's, which were already at a 4-year high, it's still too early to tell. But it's certainly starting off with a lot of optimism, and mainly driven by the activity that we're seeing in Hong Kong and India. Those are likely to be the two sort of biggest markets in terms of IPO activity. In Hong Kong, we're expecting to see the revival of IPOs that had been dormant for years because of poor markets and other reasons. These include the listing of CK Hutchison's retail arm, A.S. Watson, as well as that of Chinese and agricultural technology giant Syngenta, which had pulled an IPO back in Shanghai a few years ago. And as to India, we're expected to see the IPO of Reliance Jio, which is likely to be the country's biggest ever. So there's certainly a lot of optimism about the activity continuing across the region this year, but mainly in Hong Kong and India.
Julia, there's a whole rush of tech IPOs coming in Hong Kong later this month. Can you tell us what's in the pipeline?
There sure is, and it's mainly driven by the Chinese AI companies. Last week, we saw the listing of AI chip maker Biren, whose shares jumped about over 70% on their debut, underscoring the real optimism that we're seeing among investors about China's AI stories. And that's also because of the support that they're getting from Beijing as the US and China try to be the leaders in AI. This week, we're expecting to see the listings of large language model companies such as Zhepu and Minimax, as well as of another chip maker, Alavatar Corex. So there's really a lot of enthusiasm about the China tech, and it's sort of reminiscent of what we saw last year when DeepSeek really made its sort of world debut. And so we'll have to see whether the enthusiasm continues with these names and in the AI.
All right, Bloomberg's Julia Fioretti there. The top corporate stories that we're tracking. Steel Dynamics and Australian conglomerate SGH have made a joint $8.8 billion takeover bid for BlueScope Steel. Sydney-based SGH, controlled by billionaire Kerry Stokes, proposed acquiring Australia's biggest steelmaker and then selling its North American assets to Steel Dynamics. BlueScope has long been seen as a takeover target given the scale of its North American operations, which account for almost half its revenue. BlueScope shares up by almost 21% at the moment. Well, Bloomberg has learned that Goldman Sachs is raising a Japan real estate fund targeting about $500 million for property deals. Sources say Goldman has been pitching investors in recent months looking to take advantage of a resurgence in Japan's property market. The fund will focus on data centers, logistics, residential and hospitality assets. Walt Disney says Zootopia 2 has become the highest-grossing Hollywood film ever released in China when measured in local currency. The sequel has earned about $610 million since it was released in late November, surpassing 2019's Avengers Endgame. A report estimates animated movies generated nearly half of last year's China box office revenue, with 57 titles grossing more than $3.5 billion. Tesla's China factory shipments fell 7% in 2025, despite a last-minute bump in December. Preliminary data from China's Passenger Car Association show the automaker shipped more than 851,000 vehicles last year from its Shanghai plant. Tesla is struggling with a slowdown in global sales, losing its title as the world's largest EV maker to China's BYD. Avril.
Take a look at how futures are shaping up in the Greater China region. There is a tech focus underway, and we can talk a bit more about that. But take a look as well at how dollar China remains below the 7 handle. We did see that haven demand for the greenback a bit eroded following weak U.S. ISM manufacturing numbers. That strength is creeping back into the Chinese yuan. We'll watch the fix in the next hour. When it comes to what's supporting the Hang Seng, tech has been doing fairly well, even on the mainland. TAIEX futures, even though pointing to those declines, it's worth noting that TSMC was supported by that upgrade just a day ago from Goldman Sachs. So we'll see how that plays out today. Take a look at how Japan, South Korea are faring. It's interesting, despite the pullback that we are seeing in chip stocks now, including SK Hynix, Samsung Electronics, even Tokyo Electron, which started the day on the front foot, looking a bit tepid and shaky for the moment. What is helping the Japanese benchmarks and the broader-based topics is that broad-based gain that you're seeing among Japanese names. So that divergence between Japan and South Korea. Don't forget, we did see for the region's benchmark just yesterday reaching those record highs, that AI tech exuberance does seem to be pretty intact. Paul?
Quick word on commodities. Take a look at copper. It hit a record high, passing $13,000 a tonne. There is a rush to get shipments to the US. A few concerns there about future tariff risks. Oil, meanwhile, pulling back a little bit, but mostly shrugging off the news flow out of Venezuela. That is it for the Asia trade. Markets coverage continues as we look ahead to the start of trade in Hong Kong, Shanghai and Shenzhen. This is Bloomberg.